Hello everyone that's joined us today. Welcome to URM's webinar, and today we are going to be talking all about SOC 2. So we're going to look at the what, whys and the hows. My name is Lauren Gotting. I'm new business manager here at URM, and I'm joined by Chris, who's one of URM's senior consultants today. Okay, so we've got a pretty packed out agenda this morning. So we're going to start by looking at what SOC 2 actually is, who it applies to, and I suppose why it's becoming more and more popular. Don't know if you've all heard of it or come across it, but we're definitely seeing a lot of interest in the framework at the moment. We're going to talk about a typical scope and what the report looks like, and go over how best you can prepare for a SOC 2 audit. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll look at the key success criteria and some pitfalls to avoid. If I just start by giving everyone an overview of URM Consulting for those that are new to us. So we've been in business for nearly 20 years now and have all that experience in a number of different areas. So we cover governance, risk and compliance topics, have a cyber team and the technical expertise that goes alongside that. And we cover a number of different topics and frameworks, so ISO 27001, SOC 2, Cyber Essentials Plus, NIST. So we've got a lot of experience in this world. We've also got our own accreditation, so part of the NCSE's programs, CREST, and also Cyber Advisor. And we've got a very passionate team of people that have worked in roles in security and then consultancy as well. So seeing both sides of the fence. So that's a bit about URM. So if I hand over to Chris, who can tell you a little bit more about himself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Hayes. I'm a senior consultant at URM. I've been in the IT space for just over 30 years now, of which the last 15 have been involved in information security, and specifically around about the last 8.5 with URM. I've got experience across a range of information security spaces, and specifically the areas of SOC, ISO 27001 and PCI. I've got a CISM qualification, a CISA qualification, and I'm also a PCI QSA. During my time with URM, I've worked with a whole range of organisations in the UK and globally in a range of information security roles.
Excellent, thanks Chris. So you sound like you're the right man for today's presentation. One thing just to add to everyone, we'll hopefully cover all of your questions throughout the presentation, but if you do have any specifics that you'd like us to address, please pop them in the chat box and we'll try and cover off as many as we can at the end. So Chris, I suppose first things first, can you give us an overview? What is SOC 2?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you're all aware, it's hugely common for organisations to outsource either particular functions or particular services or the management of particular systems to third parties. When organisations do that, in essence, they can't delegate responsibilities for risks across to those third parties, and to a certain extent, the service organisations' risks become risks relevant to the client organisations as well. So this means that increasingly organisations are looking for some sort of formal assurance from their key service organisations about the maturity of the information security controls they've got in place and what they're doing in that space. And they're looking very much for a formal assurance around that.
Brilliant, thanks Chris. So we actually done a supplier risk webinar earlier in the year, and on the outcome of that was that suppliers do pose a massive risk nowadays.
Yeah, and essentially to this gap has been recognised, particularly in the States, that there wasn't this formal assurance. So essentially the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, created a framework called the Service Organisation Control Reporting Framework, SOC, which gives certified public accountants, i.e. organisations in the states that are certified, a framework to actually be able to go out and do audits and produce reports that provide this assurance over service organisations. Essentially, this framework is split into 3 types of report: SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3.
The industry doesn't like to make it easy, does it? Because we've got SOCs in terms of Security Operations Centre, SOX, and now 3 more you're throwing at us. Thank you.
It's and it's worth just briefly touching on SOC 1 and SOC 3, because there is a degree of complexity when we look at the different SOCs and the different types of reporting as well. SOC 1 relates specifically to service organisations that are involved in services or functions that relate to financial reporting for organisations. The long and the short of it with the SOC 1 report is, if your clients aren't specifically asking you for a SOC 1 report, you don't really have to worry about it. It's very much a financial auditors driven thing, and essentially your clients will be very clear with you if there is a requirement for a SOC 1 report.
Do you have an example of an organisation that might, or a type of organisation that might need a SOC 1 report?
Yeah, if you've got a service organisation that, for example, is running your payroll for you, that would be an example where potentially a SOC 1 report might be utilised. Also, if you're delivering a fully managed service to an organisation whereby you're recharging, if you're using subcontractors, that is another example, because obviously everybody wants to be clear that the books are being balanced all the way down through the supply chain.
Cheers, Chris.
The other SOC that some people come across is SOC 3. Both SOC 1 and SOC 2, and we'll come on to this later with SOC 2, are not public reports. You can't publish them on your website or whatever. And as I said, we'll come on to that later. SOC 3 gives you the ability to actually have a general use report that you can share more widely than the SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports. In truth, it's not something I'd come across a huge amount, but it is there as an option if you have a specific business case for that general use type report. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Right, let's get into the meat of stuff. What is SOC 2? SOC 2 reports are concerned with the information security controls of a service organisation. And one of the key aspects that everybody comes across when they first start looking at SOC 2 is the concept of the trust services criteria. And it's useful just briefly mentioning these now so that you get a sense of what SOC 2 covers. Essentially, the 5 TSCs are security, availability, process and integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Now, we'll come on to those in a little bit more detail as we move through exactly how a SOC 2 report would apply to you as an organisation. The key thing to remember about SOC 2, and it's like one of the things that sometimes people new to the area, organisations new to the area, don't initially realise is that SOC 2 is an attestation. It's not a certification. Essentially, what comes out of your SOC 2 audit is a report. And every time you have a SOC audit, you're always going to get a report coming out of it. There isn't the concept of a pass or a fail. Now, obviously, if you go into an audit and you haven't prepared for the audit or there's some issues with the audit, when that report comes out, there may be a number of findings within the report, which in terms of SOC 2 means that it becomes a qualified report, whereby the auditors are saying, right, you as a service organisation have said you do these things. When we looked at your evidence, we couldn't see evidence that you actually have these controls in place, or these controls are operating effectively. So essentially, that would be where you would get a qualified report. Obviously, most organisations want to be in a space where you get an unqualified report, where fundamentally the auditors are saying, we've looked at what you say you do in your information security control framework, and we could see evidence that fundamentally what you say you do, you are doing, and you're doing that on a consistent basis. The other key aspect with SOC 2 reports is that they're not public reports. You can only share them with a quite specific group of third parties. And typically those are your current clients, your prospective clients, and your internal and possibly external auditors. And when you look at a completed SOC 2 report, you'll see that the audit organisation is very, very clear about what you can actually utilise the report for. So, for example, you can't put the report on your website.
Chris, are you telling me people go through all this hard work and they don't have a shiny certificate to show to the public? No.
That's true. Yeah. But they do have a very, very detailed report.
Okay, makes up for it then.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Now we've done a bit of the background on SOC 2 and what exactly it is. I think it'd be good just to run through where it applies, who should be potentially looking at going through the SOC 2 process. Yeah.
I mean, as I said right at the start, essentially this is around client organisations getting assurance for their service organisations. So essentially, if you're an organisation that provides services to any other organisations that have any sort of aspect of managing the client organisation's information, be that processing it, storing it, analysing it, then potentially a SOC 2 report could be applicable to you. In my experience, the most common initiator for an organisation determining that it needs a SOC 2 report, this isn't going to be a great surprise, I don't think, is that there is a specific request from an existing, or quite commonly as well, a prospective client. So increasingly, organisations are talking to URM about the fact that they're looking to expand their market, either in a particular business area or particularly in the United States. And one of the precursors for them to actually be able to get on that list of potential organisations to provide a service is that they have a SOC 2 report. As we said at the start, with the SOC 2, the whole SOC framework comes from the AICPA. I'm not going to repeat what that stands for because I can't remember, but essentially they are it's a USA-based standard. So over the years, we tended to see primarily organisations that either are currently working in the States or are planning to work in the States are the ones that are finding that they potentially need a SOC 2 report. Now, as that has increasingly become almost the fundamental standard for offering a service in the States, so organisations throughout the world have started to get visibility of SOC 2 reports. So we're increasingly seeing that the SOC 2 reports are on the list of potential requirements of organisations that are operating in Europe, that are operating in the UK. And I think that's testament to the fact that the SOC 2 reports are very detailed and they do give a really strong level of assurance around a service organisation's controls.
Chris, what would your advice be? So the US sort of requisite is very interesting there. What would your advice be to an organisation that wants to do work in the US? Would you advise them to go out and get a SOC report straight away, or dip their toe in the water? What would your advice be to clients like that?
Yeah, it is an evolving space. Again, in my experience over the last few years, it's become increasingly the standard requirement. I think realistically, if you're looking to have a decent size sort of market in the States, especially if you're looking to work with larger organisations or federal government-based organisations, SOC 2 is increasingly becoming an expectation. The other thing to say is, obviously, if you do have a SOC 2 report, it's not going to do you any harm. Yep. It is just something else. It can be a differentiator. Yep. So I wouldn't say it's compulsory. Yep. to do work in the States. That's not how it operates. But yeah, increasingly, I think your expectation is, if you're going to have any significant foothold in the USA market, then a SOC 2 report is probably at some point going to come onto your agenda,
So
or a requirement from a client for a SOC 2 report is going to come onto your agenda. Yeah.
Than an if, yeah.
No, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. So obviously we've mentioned sort of supply chain as well, but it is increasing in popularity. I take that's because of the benefits, Chris. Can we run through some of those, please?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the fundamental one is that it provides what clients require. I'm a big fan of the fact that a SOC 2 report is very detailed. It does cover the technical details of the service you're delivering, as well as the information security controls that you have in place. The SOC 2 reports have a very consistent structure, so everybody knows what to expect when they open up a SOC 2 report. It's going to have the same elements in there. The CPAs are the organisations that do the auditing, so they are invariably all very well respected, respected sort of audit organisations. So again, that helps to provide a really strong sort of level of assurance. And as I said, it's very structured. It gives a clear overview, not just of your information security controls, and we'll come on to this again as we look at some more of the detail of a SOC 2 report, but it also requires some information about how your organisation operates in terms of the ethics of the organisation, the governance of the organisation as well. So it's not just concentrating on your information processes and information controls. It's wanting to ensure that they're operating within a wider framework of governance and structure. As I keep reiterating, the report is quite detailed, so it goes down into details of the technology, the infrastructure, and the third parties that you utilise. So it makes it very clear that if you're utilising AWS or utilising Azure, it's going to be very clear in the report that you are making use of those and exactly how you're making use of those. Also, it goes down into level of detail of what the key systems you're utilising. So you're giving visibility to your current clients or your prospective clients of what types of security tools you're using. So your anti-malware tools, the tools you're using for scanning, and what you're actually doing with those tools. So again, it's very detailed. And as I said, obviously the last bullet point here is it reassures prospective clients that you've got a set of established and well-managed information security controls in place, and that the wider organisation has a strong level of governance and structure around it as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. So it sounds like there's more benefits than just security.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning when we talked about why are SOC 2 reports becoming more commonly utilised. When you look at the supply chain, so if you're an organisation that provides services, it's likely that you've got some suppliers yourself that are providing services to you. So you're in effect you're in the middle of a supply chain. Increasingly, what we see is service organisations' clients are asking for SOC 2 reports. Yeah. The service organisation is then looking at the organisations that are providing services to it, and logically, it's sort of saying, well, if we're being asked for a SOC 2 report, we really need to be going to our key suppliers and asking them for SOC 2 reports as well. So it becomes like a chain almost. Yeah. It becomes it's almost like an ecosystem of these reports and this assurance through the whole sort of supply chain.
Yeah, just cascading.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Thanks, Chris. That's really useful. So I think with sort of most frameworks, scoping is really important, and I think that's the same with SOC 2. So can we dive into some of the details then about what a scope might look like for SOC 2 and the report itself and what that looks like?
Yeah, this is probably one of the biggest challenges organisations initially have when they start thinking about SOC 2. A lot of you are familiar with standards like ISO 27001. ISO 27001, typically the expectation is that you're getting certified across your whole organisation, or a key branch of your organization. With SOC 2, it's all about assuring the services that you're delivering. So essentially, the scope of a SOC 2 report is limited to the delivery of specific services. So, for example, if you're an organization, I don't know, you had half a dozen different services that you were delivering, 2 of which you're looking to start delivering into the USA.
Sorry, Chris, quick question there. So when you say specific services, are we talking technology services?
It's services which are processing, storing, handling client data. So those are types of services, which is a good point, because I have had examples of organizations talking to us, whether like consultancy organizations or whatever, and you're looking at that and looking and thinking, I'm not sure exactly where the business case is there for a SOC 2 report, because you're not necessarily directly handling your client's data in some shape or form. So yeah, it's a good point. Specific services which in some way are handling client data, and so there needs to be that, again, that assurance around information security. So yes, so the example of an organization with half a dozen services, if 2 of those services are services that you are currently or you are looking to market in the USA, and your other 3 services are very specific to the UK or very specific to Europe, there is absolutely no issue in you looking and saying, right, well, we will get a SOC 2 report for those 2 services. You could even go down to the level of, if for those 2 services only one of them has clients who are asking for a SOC 2 report, you could actually limit it down to that single service. So as long as you've got clarity around exactly what the service is, so that you and your clients are on the same page with what the scope of a report is, it can be limited to specific services. And I mean, when we talk about that, we have to also be clear that essentially, when you're talking about those specific services, the structure of your SOC 2 report is that it basically wants to assure what it calls a system. So i.e. the system that is delivering your services. Right. And the system consists of the very specific stuff that you're utilizing for that service. So how the service is developed, how the service is secured technically, how the service is supported technically. But aspects of the system also include those supporting back office functions as well. So it's important to remember that when you're looking, when you said, right, in actual fact, of our 6 services, these 2 services are going to be in our scope of our SOC 2 report. And I guess we could argue the initial scope of our SOC 2 report, because you could always expand it as you move forward in subsequent years. It's basically looking at that, saying, right, what do we do to actually support that service? So it will be your frontline guys that are working on that service, supporting that service, developing that service, securing that service. But you also have to ensure that you're doing that wider governance piece, and you've got information about HR processes and things like that. Again, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through here. But yeah, that essentially is the scope. So it's very clearly, what services do you need to have a SOC 2 report for?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris.
The other thing to be aware of, and I've sort of touched on this already in terms of that supply chain concept, is that you need to be talking about all of the aspects that are supporting your service. So if you're utilizing any sort of third parties as part of the delivery of your service, within your SOC 2 report, you need to specify that. They're actually called in SOC 2 subservice organizations. So essentially, if you've got a third party that is either fully responsible for or is delivering the bulk of particular controls, they need to be listed in your report as a subservice organization. The most typical example here is the providers of your cloud environment or your data center services. If we talk about if you had a subservice organization that is providing your data center services, they are obviously going to be responsible for the controls related to physical security of that infrastructure. So how is the data center physically secured? Now, when you're looking at actually determining exactly what those controls are and how your subservice organizations are fulfilling your requirements for those controls, the easiest situation is if they've already got their own SOC 2 report. And basically what you can then do in your SOC 2 report is list the controls that a subservice organization is responsible for, and fundamentally extract out of their SOC 2 report what they say they do for those specific controls. It's not compulsory to do it that way. I mean, if they've got an ISO 27001 certification, you would be able to utilize information based around that and the controls that they've got based around that as well.
Would it be a bit like responsibility matrix, like in PCI? Is that same sort of thing?
To a degree. I mean, as you would probably expect, the way that the SOC 2 report wants to structure this is about the requirements from SOC 2. So essentially, you will be specifying particular points of focus from the SOC 2 standard and specifying how the subservice organization fulfills those. Obviously, if you're utilizing 2 data centers, you would have to do that twice.
Okay, so a bit of who does what.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, another common example is if you outsource your HR functions, and so HR are responsible. You have the third parties potentially responsible for managing employee training, onboarding, offboarding, those types of things. Again, you would expect those specific points of focus to be detailed for that subservice organization, again specifying exactly what they do.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Brilliant, thank you very much, Chris. So different types of reports for SOC 2. So there's 2 types. I think it'd be good just to go over some of the high level details of each report, if that's all right, Chris.
Yeah, this is absolutely, when you earlier said they don't make it easy, this is absolutely another example of where the structure of SOC doesn't necessarily make it easy. As we've already talked about, there are SOC 1, SOC 2 and SOC 3 reports. When you look at SOC 2 reports, there are SOC 2 type 1 reports and SOC 2 type 2 reports. And essentially, quite often this causes a little bit of confusion. If we talk about type 2 reports initially, essentially, if you're going to be getting a SOC 2 type 2 report, what the auditors are going to do in the audit is look at your information security processes and controls and how they've operated over a specified period of time. So it's not just a case of you being able to demonstrate that you've got a really good set of policies and processes. You have to be able to demonstrate that what you say in those policies and processes have been operating consistently and effectively over a specified period of time. And when the SOC 2 type 2 report is produced, there is a big section which details exactly how the auditors have validated that operational effectiveness of your processes and of your controls. A type 1 report essentially covers absolutely the same areas as a type 2 report, so it will cover the same scope. It will be looking at exactly the same processes and controls. The difference is it won't be doing that testing of operational effectiveness over a specified period of time. I guess if I give an example, that will help to show, hopefully help to show the difference between these 2 things. If we looked at change management, in a type 1 report, so the point in time report, essentially the auditors would be looking at your change management policy, your change management process. They will then also look at they will ask for, will show us some examples of change requests, and they will look at some example change requests that you have provided to them to make sure that they cover everything you say in your policies and processes. In a SOC 2 type 2 report, so the one that's over a specified period, they will do all of that stuff, but they will also say, right, for the reporting period, give us a list of all of the changes, all the change numbers that you've actioned over that time period. They will then do a sample from that and run through it and validate whether every single one of the items in the sample match up to what you say you do. So that's sort of the key difference there.
Yeah. So you've got to have the historic evidence. I think,
yeah,
for me, a really good point there, because I think there is a lot of confusion out there, is whether you're doing a type 1 or type 2, you still need the same controls in place. I think that
absolutely. Yeah, and the very important thing to say here as well is the type 1 report isn't a stepping stone to type 2. Quite often organizations say, this all sounds like a bit scary. We want to do it in a structured way. So we're going to ask, and we're going to do a type 1 report, and then we'll do a type 2 report. A type 1 report is only really applicable in 2 very specific instances. It's where either you as an organization haven't had your control framework, your information security control framework in place for any significant period of time, so you're not able to show operational effectiveness, or the organization's fundamentally changed in some way in terms of how it's structured or the types of work it does or whatever, and again, you're not able to show that operational effectiveness. A type 1 report will not be seen by your clients as a staging point. They will potentially come back and sort of ask, why aren't you able to show operational effectiveness over a period of time for all of the stuff that you say you do? So it's essentially, if you've got a requirement to have a SOC 2 report in place by a specified date, but you're not going to be able to show operational effectiveness, that's when you have a type 1 report.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. So then we covered the type 2 sort of reporting period there, but if we just give a quick overview of the reporting period.
Yeah, there's a degree of flexibility here. Now, obviously, the reporting period needs to be a sensible, valid length of time. Typically with audit organizations, 3 months is probably the shortest period that they're willing to accept for an initial report. 6 months is another common one. Ideally, even for your initial report, you want to be saying, can we do 12 months? But if you just don't have that information, it's really common for organizations to do 6 months or 3 months for their initial report. Obviously, the longer reporting period, the greater the assurance. The other thing to remember around this is SOC 2 reporting and auditing is an annual based process, basically. So that the expectation is, once you've got your initial report in place, be that 3, 6 or 12 months reporting period, subsequent reports will be produced 12 months afterwards, and they will cover a 12-month period. Your clients will be expecting you to have no gaps between those reports as well. So it's to a certain extent, it's once you're in the SOC 2 space, the expectation is that you're going to be in there never more, essentially, really. I mean, that sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? But that's the principle of it. It's not a one-off thing. Clients will see, they will see your report, the validity of your report expiring after a specified period of time.
I suppose you wouldn't need any gaps, so would you anyway? Because you just roll in.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. So, can we have a little bit more information on the trust service criteria and what they're all about, please?
Yeah. So as we mentioned, basically the way SOC 2 is structured is it has these 5 trust service criteria, and then within the trust service criteria, there's sub criteria, and then there's points of focus. So that's the structure. Of the 5 TSCs, security is the only mandatory one. So you obviously have to have that in all reports, in all audits.
And sorry, Chris, so the organization going through the SOC 2 process, they get to pick which criteria they...
Yeah. I mean, again, security is mandatory. And it's the biggest trust service criteria, and it covers all of the aspects of governance, risk management, stuff around access management, how you a lot of the stuff about how you secure your services and validate the security of your services. Arguably, I mean, it's quite similar to the ISMS and sort of the key areas of control from ISO 27001. The other 4 criteria are then all optional. and fundamentally whether you have a requirement to include those in your SOC 2 report depends on a couple of things. Primarily, it depends on the type of service that you're delivering, and then also it depends on what the expectations of your clients are. So if we just briefly talk through what these 4 criteria are, it's availability. So this basically is a criteria that's looking to assure that what you say you do in terms of the uptime of your services and the availability of your services in contracts and things is actually being managed. And
so that would be like the likes of Microsoft. We always keep them available, don't we? They can't go down. Yeah.
And it's quite frequently, for example, if you're delivering a SaaS service, it's quite likely that your clients are going to have an expectation about how available that service is. So that would be where availability would be a valid criteria. Processing integrity, sort of, as its title suggests, is quite specific. If you're delivering a service which is processing client data, so essentially your client data is being input into your service, and then results are coming out of the other end in some shape or form, processing integrity could be valid. So the types of areas processing integrity as a TSC covers are the data flow, how you're validating inputs, how you're validating outputs, how you're validating that your inputs and outputs match each other.
Yeah.
Confidentiality, it relates to the fact that you've got controls in place to manage the availability and the confidentiality of information. And again, this is quite often based on what you're contractually obliged to do in terms of managing the confidentiality of your client's data. And in ISO 27001 talk, it relates to things like your information classification and handling policy and the processes you have around that.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy fundamentally relates to services where you're handling PII, so private data of individuals, and quite often the areas that are involved there are, have you got a privacy policy that you're providing to end users? What controls have you got around your personally identifiable information, your PII specifically, access to that PII, those types of things.
Brilliant. So it covers a lot then, really. If you're looking across all 5 criteria, that covers. But
again, just to reiterate, this is related to the type of service you're delivering, and also to a degree your client's expectations.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
There's also an aspect when you do an initial report, you might decide, right, we're just going to have security in your report. Subsequent years, you can expand out your trust service criteria.
Yeah. Excellent. It's a bit more of a journey than
can be,
just get it done. Excellent. So what does the report look like, Chris?
Yeah, as we said, the report is very standard. It's broken into 4 high-level elements. There's the auditor's report, which is basically the formal detail of what the auditors have done, what their opinion of your system and the services is. An accreditation letter from the organisation senior management, which basically is a fairly standard letter, but it's saying that what we've said in the report that we do is an accurate reflection, and we as a senior management team are willing to sign off that what we say we do, we're actually doing, and the whole of this report is an accurate reflection of what we've been doing, what we're currently doing, and what we're going to be doing in the future. A description of the system, which we will come on to in a second, and then a big old section which is basically detailing for a type 2 report the tests for each test, for each of the criteria and the sub criteria and the points of focus. The auditor will be specifying, this is the testing that we did, this was the finding from our testing.
Brilliant. Thank you. So moving on to the system description, then there's a lot that goes into it, and some of it on the slide here, company background, is pretty self-explanatory. There's a few that I think may be worth diving into more detail around. So like system components, Chris, what does that mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I think at first it's worth saying really this slide is just showing you how detailed this whole piece is. And as an example, system components, you're in that section, what you're saying is, you're detailing is, right, this is the infrastructure that we're utilizing. So we're using cloud infrastructure, we're utilizing these types of servers, that type of level. It also details the types of software that you're utilizing. So this is the anti-malware systems that we're utilizing. These are the this is the vulnerability scanning tool that we're utilizing, and also it's some aspects around these are the operating systems that we're utilizing. This is the type of technologies that we're making use of.
And what's meant by the control environment here? Is that self-explanatory, or
yeah,
more meaning to that? If that's okay.
Really, if you look at the two halves here, it's again coming back to what we said at the start, that there's sort of two aspects to the SOC 2 report. It's obviously looking at the detail of your information security processes and controls, and that's very much that overview of operations, drilling into how are you doing that, what tools are you utilizing to do that, how are you protecting stuff. The control environment is a little bit more of that broader piece around the wider organization. So for example, the first bullet point here, control environment, really what that is referencing is the ethics of the organization. So for example, do you have a code of conduct? Do you have a code of ethics in your organization? How do you implement it? How do you ensure that everybody follows it? How do you manage your employees in terms of training, reviews, ensuring that they have what they need? So it's two aspects. It's the detail about exactly what you're doing around information security and the operational piece, and then that wider piece.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, so moving on then to the audit.
Yeah, the key thing to take from this is SOC 2 audits are 100% evidence-based. The typical route that is followed by most SOC 2 audit organizations is they basically provide you with a big old list of evidence that they require, and that evidence will be policy and process documentation, so the stuff that says what you do, and then evidence to prove that what you say you do you're actually doing. So, and that can be quite detailed, so it will come down to levels of things like screenshots of your actual system configuration, so configurations of if you're utilizing Active Directory, your Active Directory password policy, your Active Directory lockout policy, the Active Directory groups you're utilizing, and the level of access they provide. It's also things like governance meetings, so it's not good enough just to say, well, we have a board meeting where information security risks are talked about. Yeah. You need to be able to show that you've got an agenda and you've got minutes associated with that. Results of audits as well.
And so for a 12-month review period, you've got to have done that for 12 months consistently. Cool. At least it's not a 12-month audit. That's
no. Yeah. And obviously some of this stuff is point in time. I mean, your configurations, system configurations will be point in time. But when we get down to change, incident, access management, you need to be able to demonstrate that these have been operating effectively over the whole period.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. So the next slide is all around the audit timeline. So it can get a little bit tricky then if you're going 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. How much time are you actually sat in front of someone? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, this is obviously how long's a piece of string. But in saying that, what this slide is really helping you to see is that the audit is an in-depth audit. It is a commitment. It's weeks rather than days of involvement. The auditors will work with you to work out what that timeline looks like. Typically, the auditors will then give you a set of evidence requests, and be under no illusion, this evidence request list will be quite big. It will be in the potentially in the hundreds of lines of evidence that are required. Some of which will have overlaps and you'll be able to provide the same evidence for the same request. But nevertheless, it will be a reasonably big list. And that's why you have a period of like a month, a window of a month, maybe even longer, where the auditors have given you their requests, you're providing the evidence. against those requests. And then obviously the auditors will review that, and they might start reviewing it when you haven't given all of the evidence. The concept of audit meetings will typically only occur if the auditors have got questions about the evidence, or they think there's stuff missing from the evidence, or they don't understand the evidence. So the change management example, if you provide your policy, your processes, they give you a sample of change requests they want to look at, they look at them all, it's all really straightforward. It's quite possible that they will have no questions about change management. So it's not the concept of you having to line up for audit interviews, people from every process. You wait for the auditors to come back to you and say, these are the areas, these are the questions we've got.
That's interesting. Sounds like actually once you've done the evidence, then it's quite hands off, really. It's all on the auditors.
Depends on how good the evidence is, obviously. Yeah. And then the report, again, I'm never going to get tired of saying report is very detailed. So it does take a while for the report to be produced. So you have to bake that into your requirements, and be very aware of when do you need your final SOC 2 report in your hands. And then to a degree, you need to work back from that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Chris. Right, so how best can people prepare for a SOC 2 audit?
Yeah, we've touched on a few of these pieces already. Obviously, the key things initially are to determine the scope, what services and things are going to be involved, determine what trust service criteria that are going to be applicable, and get a sense of what you're comfortable with a reporting period. Are you in a space where you established your control framework already, so you can say straight away it's 12 months, going down to 6 months, going down to 3 months? Audit organisations for SOC 2, like audit organisations around the world for all sorts of different standards, seem to get booked up quite quickly. So we always advise start having conversations with your potential SOC 2 audit organisations sooner rather than later, so you can work out what the art of the possible is in terms of timeframes. Conduct a gap analysis. So this really is around looking at what you've got, what you haven't got, and more specifically looking at your confidence about whether you can evidence these things. That's the absolutely key thing here. You can have the world's greatest policies and processes, and be able to go and cherry pick some examples from change or whatever, and be able to say, well, look, aren't we great? You need to be confident that consistently you've got evidence across the whole reporting period. So that's absolutely key. So and obviously based on the gap analysis, looking to implement any missing processes or controls, update existing, that should say, processes and controls, and also the gap analysis will help you identify, have you got areas where you're a bit shaky on whether you can 100% evidence the effectiveness of the thing. And that's really what that second from last bullet point is: validate that the process and controls can be evidenced for the entire reporting period.
Brilliant.
And then obviously you need to agree timelines with your CPA, your SOC 2 audit organisation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. So what are the key success factors in your eyes? Obviously, you've been through a fair few of these audits. So what's the key to success here?
Yeah, it's you need to be clear on why you need a SOC 2 report, which sounds a bit odd, but it comes back to that whole piece around scope and the trust service criteria and things. So why exactly are you doing it? Who are you getting this report for? What clients are going to be reading the report? What are their expectations? So that's absolutely the key around that. The service description is quite a detailed, structured piece of a report, and you as the organisation are responsible for completing that. So it's making sure that you've got the right level of detail there, and also remembering this report is going to your key clients and prospective clients. So you want to show your organisation in the best light possible. Sometimes when I talk to organisations, they're sort of wanting to skimp over some of the detail, and you say, well, that's fine, but you've got really good detail there. So why wouldn't you put it into your report? So that's absolutely a key aspect of it. You want to show your organisation in the best light, and the service description is the place that you can do that. It goes without saying, as we already touched on, your employees need to be operating the controls as designed. Again, if your change management policy says that against every change request you attach all of the test evidence, you need to make sure that all the test evidence is always attached. And this ties into this whole thing around consistency between your policies, processes and tools. Because your auditors are looking at your evidence sort of independent of you, you're providing with your policies, your processes, your change requests or whatever other evidence, and they're looking at them in isolation. You need it to be consistent so that there's not going to be questions.
And the clearer the better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Consistency and clarity. Again, okay, that's a good point. That would be definitely the 2 C words around that. Evidence of control operation is securely stored. Sounds a bit stupid, but if you've got great policies, great processes, and you're operating your controls brilliantly, if you haven't got evidence that you have been operating them over the whole reporting period, you've got a gap. So sometimes organisations will go, well, we've been running it for 6 months, but we had in July we forgot to store or back up particular evidence. So we've got a gap. If you've got a gap, that's going to come out on the report. Clarity on how your IS systems operate and are configured. Again, your auditors are going to look at your service description. They're going to look at all of the evidence that you provided, and they're going to want to understand how it all fits together. So you need to be confident that things like Active Directory or whatever, you really understand how they operate, how you configure them, and why you've configured them in that way.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
excellent. Thank you, Chris. Conscious of time, and the last sort of section, I suppose, is all around the pitfalls. So we've got time, hopefully, to answer a few questions at the end, Chris, if we can run through some of the main pitfalls maybe that you've seen. Yeah,
and this is obviously slightly the reverse of what the success factors are. You need to be clear about why you're doing it, and so what your client's expectations are. If the client are absolutely expecting you to have availability in the report, you need to have availability in the report. In saying that, there's not a competition to have as the most number of trust service criteria in your report. If a trust service criteria really isn't applicable to the service you're delivering, don't put it in the report. So that's, I've had organisations that have included process and integrity and then really struggled to evidence what they mean by process and integrity. Again, not having evidence of effective operation of processes for a whole period. If you've got gaps, they are going to be recorded on the report as exceptions. You would still get an unqualified report, so you're not going to get a report where the auditors are going to have any issues in their summary at the top. But in the section which details all the operational testing they've done, if, for example, they've sampled 25 change requests and 2 of them didn't have testing information attached to them, they will put that down as an exception. It's not uncommon for there to be exceptions on reports, but that's why having evidence of effective operation of all those processes is important. Remembering that if you've already got an ISO 27001 certificate, you need to remember that SOC 2 covers some additional areas. It dives into employee processes in more depth. It's more interested in governance of the organisation. It's more interested in some aspects of information communication inside and outside of the organisation. You need to remember you got those. Making sure governance is documented, meetings, decisions, actions, and also underestimating how long it's going to take you to gather the evidence. There is an expectation for a lot of evidence.
It's a bit of a task, eh? Not only doing it all throughout the year,
again,
but actually
you absolutely need to go in this with your eyes open. The rewards are great in that the report is great, really detailed, great assurance, but there is effort involved in it.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. So we've got time for, I'd say, just sort of pick a couple of questions. And if we don't get to your question, apologies, but we'll reach out and address it offline. So One of the questions I thought that came in really sort of important is, how do you determine the controls? Do auditors accept self-defined controls, or is there a standard to follow?
That's a very good question. The principles that SOC 2 were initiated on, and the way I see it, is that there was an expectation that organisations would look at the points of focus and determine their own controls against those points of focus. The way that the auditing process has evolved is that the audit organisations will assist you with that. They will look at your scope, your trust service criteria, your reporting period, and utilise their experience to give you their expectations. So they will give you an indication, if you require it, of what controls you need to have in place.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. And I don't know if we can make this one very quick again. 27 and SOC 2, how do they compare? How do they overlap?
Yeah, the way I look at this is, if you've already got ISO 27001, you've got all of the huge number of the fundamentals you need for SOC 2. SOC 2 is wider, the audit process does go into it in a lot more depth, but it's a really, really good foundation for it. The SOC 2, they expect you to have some sort of control framework. They expect you to be managing your controls, i.e. have an ISMS. Mm-hmm. So ISO 27001 is absolutely a really good thing to already have in place, and you can build SOC 2 on top of it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so starting point, yeah?
Yeah.
And actually, we've got time for one more, Chris, because I think this one is a bit of a yes or no. Can privacy and confidentiality really be optional, SOC 2?
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, with that.
Do you want a little bit more? So yeah, if you're not handling PII as part of your service, then it's not applicable. And again, as you get into the depths of looking at exactly what the points of focus are and the types of controls that are required around privacy, it is coming down to things like having a privacy policy on your website, which you're not going to have if you don't actually handle any, or potentially you're not going to have if you're not handling any PII for that organisation. Confidentiality is one where it's much more frequent to include. If I'm honest, security, you always have to have. The next two most frequent ones are availability and confidentiality. Privacy and processing integrity tend to be a little bit more specific to very specific types of service that are being delivered.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. And again, if we didn't manage to cover your question right now, we'll reach out, we'll get in touch to address those for you. In terms of how URM can help, if you are looking at SOC 2, if you want to start a SOC 2 journey, there's a number of different offerings we have, and you may be lucky enough to get Chris potentially as well. So we can help with defining scope, selecting the criteria based on what your organisation does and the service it offers, conducting a gap analysis as well. So if you have any sort of frameworks in place, we can look at that and what else you might need to do to meet the SOC 2 requirements, and also support during a SOC 2 audit with evidence gathering, which can be a bit of a painful process. So yeah, depending on where you are in your journey, please do let us know if you want to talk about anything. Some upcoming events, so hopefully you've all received mailers for these events. So we've got ISO 13485, which is all around medical devices. So we're going to be doing that joint with BSI mid-October, and then towards the end of October we've got Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, with a new release on the question set ready for next year as well. So we'll cover a little bit of that during that session. If you don't get our invitations, please subscribe. We do a lot of good events. And hopefully you found this one useful, so please do complete your feedback form so we can use that to mold events in the future. Lastly, I think from myself and from Chris, thank you very much for spending today with us, and hopefully, yeah, you've picked up a few useful tips and pointers.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.